Hey guys, this is Candle and welcome to another game collection video. This is the final one for Nintendo. It's just the handhelds, and I actually forgot to grab something real quick because we're going to start this off with Game Boy Color, and unfortunately this is my smallest collection at all because I only have one game for it. I actually keep it in my Game Boy Color. It is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This is you already saw me talk a little bit about the PC version. This one is a little bit different because this is actually a kind of almost like a JRPG is kind of how it's designed. But that's my only Game Boy Color game. But I do also have one boxless Game Boy Advance game. The rest of my Game Boy Advance games are in boxes, and this one I keep in my Game Boy Advance as well. This is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the Game Boy Advance. This is more of a 2D top-down puzzle platformer game. So, like I said in the PC video, you know, the first Harry Potter games were all like completely different and everything, based on what platform they were on. So that's it for Game Boy Color and my lone Game Boy Advance cartridges. Everything else is in boxes. Let's get this started. Last year, I believe it was, I did a Let's Play of Golden Sun, and I really enjoyed it. I do like this game. Classic JRPG on the Game Boy Advance. This year, at some point, I plan to do a Let's Play of its sequel, Golden Sun: The Lost Age. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. It kind of continues the story and everything. Kind of shifts things around, though, because no longer do you have these four are not the main characters anymore. They do make an appearance, and you do get to add them to your party later on. But instead, you got these four now, who are the main party. Anyways, of course, what Game Boy Advance collection would be complete without a couple Final Fantasy games? Unfortunately, I don't have all the Final Fantasy games available on the Game Boy Advance. I'm still missing a few of them, but I do have Final Fantasy 1 and 2, Dawn of Souls, which is basically a port of Final Fantasy Origins from the PS1, where it has Final Fantasy 1 and 2, as in the name. But this adds in some extra optional dungeons and so on as well. So it's not a bad way to play it, but I wouldn't say it's the best way either. The best way I would say would be the PS1 or the PSP versions to play those games. But I do also have Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and I could have sworn I put over 300 hours into this game as a kid, but I booted it up not too long ago just to check, and it turns out that I actually only put about 30 hours into this game. So I guess my mind exaggerated things from when I was younger, but still quite a bit of fun. This is a kind of an isometric tactical strategy game, turn-based and everything. It's a lot of fun, and it's not a sequel to Final Fantasy Tactics on the PS1 in terms of story. It's more of a spin-off or a spiritual successor, because it's the same type of gameplay, but a completely different story. It does still take place in the world of Ivalice, as all the Tactics games do, as well as Final Fantasy 12 and Vagrant story, but it's a different kind of Ivalice rather than what you see in those games. So definitely a good thing to check out if you want. And of course, me being me, I also really liked Harvest Moon as a kid. So of course, I gotta get this in here. I also have Harvest Moon: Friends of Mineral Town. This is, believe it or not, this is a handheld remake of Harvest Moon: Back to Nature from the PS1. I won't say it's just a straight up port, because they turned it from being isometric to just regular top down for this, but it's still kind of interesting, and this actually has some bonus features that correspond to A Wonderful Life on the GameCube, where if you linked up the two games using the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube link cable, you could actually unlock some extra things as well. And I put a lot of time into this game as a kid. I really enjoyed playing that. And of course, I also have Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, the original Game Boy Advance version. This game came out before Kingdom Hearts 2, as kind of it was intended originally to be kind of a spin-off, but as we learned more and more about Kingdom Hearts 2, we quickly realized that it's not a spin-off so much as it is a side story, and it really does help fill in the gaps for Sora and his party for what happens between 1 and 2. Unfortunately, not all of the gaps are filled in, but most of them, I would say. It's not a bad game. It's not my favorite way to play that game. I would much rather have the 3D remake, Rechain of Memories, and play that on the PS4, but it's not a bad way to play the game. I just don't really enjoy the combat system at all, because it's all card-based, and it's really weird. But speaking of action RPGs, I also have Sword of Mana. Now, this is actually a remake of the first Seiken Densetsu game, which released in the West on the Game Boy as Final Fantasy Legend, I think? No, I think it was Final Fantasy Adventure, was Seiken Densetsu. And the Final Fantasy Legend games were the first Saga games. But yeah, this is kind of an enhanced remake where the original game just had the hero story, and then this one added in a heroine story as well. I've never actually beaten this, but it's two different stories based on which one you choose at the beginning. I really do need to get back into playing this at some point, because this is, in my opinion, this is one of the better Mana games. It's just a shame that we will never see a proper remake of the original here in the West. Well, we might. There's been rumors of it, but I doubt it. Anyways, the last Game Boy Advance game I have, yeah, it's not a very large collection, is it? But the last Game Boy Advance game I have is a port of a Super Famicom game that didn't make it to the West until it came to the Game Boy Advance, and that is, of course, Tales of Phantasia. This is the very first Tales game ever made. It was made for the Super Famicom, and it didn't come to the West until 2003. So this would have been either around the same time or shortly after Tales of Symphonia started making headlines on the GameCube. So it's still quite a fun game. I haven't finished this yet, though. I need to get back into playing that. Anyways, that's it for Game Boy Advance, and now we're moving on to the next generation of Nintendo handhelds, the Nintendo DS, and I have quite a bit more of these. I'm going to start off with a couple of launch titles. I have Feel the Magic XX and XY, or sorry, XYXX. This is a weird it's like it's half dating sim and half minigame collection. It's really weird, and a lot of early DS games really used the system to its full potential, including the microphone that's on there that I don't think a lot of people realize was there. And I also have Trace Memory, which is kind of a almost like a point and click adventure. A little bit more on the visual novel side, but it's you do get to wander around and actually move around a bit, so it's not like straight up visual novel. Definitely more of a point and click, and really interesting. It's a kind of a mystery game as well. A lot of fun there too. And of course, what launch game did most people get with their DS when it came out in 2005, I think? Of course, the Metroid Prime Hunters First Hunt demo. So this is a little bit weird because it's not a standard plastic case like you normally find. Instead, it's just a little cardboard fold-it here. And the game cartridge, the game pack, actually comes in a little plastic sleeve. Now, I actually got my original DS pre-owned from GameStop, so there was no guarantee I was actually going to get this in there, but thankfully it did include it, so I didn't have to try to hunt it down afterwards. I've never actually played Metroid Prime Hunters, the full game, but I have enjoyed the First Hunt demo as well. And it's basically a first-person shooter on the DS. All right, speaking of Kingdom Hearts earlier, there were two Kingdom Hearts games on the DS. You have Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days, which fills in the rest of the gaps between Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 and explains a little bit about how Roxas got into the situation he's in at the beginning of the game. And then there was Kingdom Hearts Recoded, which is completely skippable. In fact, both of these games are fairly skippable, although I would definitely say pay attention to 358 over 2 days because of the story. But they're so skippable that when it came time to do the HD remasters of the games, they ended up just turning them into movies for those two. All right, another odd one I have. I picked this up on the recommendation of a fellow YouTuber, I think, by the name of Scottish Duck. I think he was the one who recommended this to me. Well, not personally recommended, but through his own collection updates and so on. I have Ivy the Kiwi. I gotta get this angled right. There we go, Ivy the Kiwi. And this is an interesting puzzle game where Ivy the Kiwi, the main character here, is non-stop moving back and forth across the screen, and you have to use the stylus to draw ramps and platforms and lines for him to walk across to move up and down and stuff like that. So it's really an interesting gimmick for the game. It's not a very long one, though, but definitely worth checking out. And of course, there were some Harvest Moon games on the DS as well. I didn't get all of them, but I do have Harvest Moon DS. Now, this one, just like Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life on the GameCube, and more Friends of Mineral Town on the Game Boy Advance. Also has a separate version where you get to play as a female character. And those are, Harvest Moon: Another Wonderful Life, Harvest Moon: More Friends of Mineral Town, and Harvest Moon DS Cute. But this is just the original game here. Basically Harvest Moon on the DS. And then I have Harvest Moon DS, or Sunshine Islands. And I think this is a remake of the third Game Boy Color game, but I'm not entirely sure. Because there were 3 games on the Game Boy Color for Harvest Moon as well. And the third one I remember taking place on islands. I think it was the Sunshine Islands, but I'm not entirely sure. Either way, this is a game I haven't actually spent too much time with. I kind of started falling out of in love with the Harvest Moon franchise around this time, unfortunately. So I did buy more later on, but I just didn't really get too invested in them. And of course, Golden Sun 1 and 2 were on the Game Boy Advance, and the way Golden Sun 2 ends really leaves it open for more games. And I've heard that the creators had originally planned a 7-game saga. So eventually they were lucky enough to get a third game for the Game Boy, or for the DS, and that is Golden Sun Dark Dawn. Now, I haven't actually spent much time with this game, unfortunately, so I really need to. I remember starting this up and being really disappointed that it doesn't follow any of the main characters from the previous 2 games, instead picking up with the next generation afterwards. You're playing like as their kids and so on. And I remember being super disappointed by that for some reason. Because this is Isaac here from the first game. That's actually Isaac's son. And I don't remember what his name is right now for some reason. It doesn't say it on the back. But one of these days I'll give this a try. Maybe after I do a Let's Play of The Lost Age, maybe I'll figure out how to emulate this so I can actually do a Let's Play of this as well. Or I might just play it on the DS and not do a Let's Play. I don't know. I'll figure it out. And, of course, another classic JRPG got ported over from the Super Nintendo. Actually, this was ported over from the PlayStation, which was ported over from the Super Nintendo. We have Chrono Trigger for the DS. Now, this, in my mind, is the second best way to play this game. You've got all of the additions from the PlayStation version, the bestiary, the anime cutscenes and everything, minus the loading times, plus the addition of an extra dungeon at the end and an all-new fresh translation. I'm a bit of a purist, so I still prefer the Super Nintendo version, but this isn't a bad way to do it. Not at all. Now, there were a pair of really good turn-based strategy games on the Game Boy Advance. I used to have them. I don't anymore, but they do have a couple sequels on the DS. So we have Advance Wars DS, or Advance Wars Dual Strike, which is a direct sequel to the previous 2 games. And then we have Advance Wars Days of Ruin, which is kind of a reboot of the franchise, a darker, grittier reboot of the franchise, where it's the exact same gameplay, but all new world and characters and everything. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten too far into them, but they are enjoyable at least, so that's good. Alright, now I don't unfortunately have Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo 64, but I do have Super Mario 64 DS, which isn't a bad way to play this game. It's a little bit odd because the game was intended for to control with an analog stick, and the DS doesn't have that, so they kind of simulated that by putting a wheel on the trackpad on the touchscreen and allowing the stylus to kind of act almost like an analog stick, but it's not quite the same. Still a lot of fun. This actually has co-op in it, and not split screen co-op. You got to go through download player, have everybody have their own carts and everything, but you can actually play as all 4 characters on here, where you got Mario, you got Luigi, you got Yoshi, and you got Wario. And even playing single player, you can play as those characters by equipping different hats and so on. And I think they added like 30 new stars to the game because of that, but still a pretty good game. Really showed what the DS was capable of early on in its lifespan. All right, next 3 games are classic puzzle games. Unfortunately, there's a 4th one on the DS that I do not currently have, but I do have the original Professor Layton trilogy. I've got Professor Layton in the Curious Village, Professor Layton in the Diabolical Box, and Professor Layton in the Unwound Future. And these are just straight up puzzle games. They've got nice mystery stories, mystery-based stories to solve and stuff. But these are all just straight up puzzle games. I mean, this one, the tagline is solve brain teasers to crack the case. You know, the second one says over 150 brain teasers down at the bottom there, and the last one says over 165 puzzles. So these are definitely worth having on the DS. And a lot of times when you talk about Professor Layton, there's another franchise you have to talk about, and this is a visual novel uh, series that got its start on the Game Boy Advance in Japan, but didn't make its way to the West until the DS. And actually, I think it just recently got an HD remaster on PS4 and maybe a few other platforms as well. And that is, of course, the Phoenix Wright trilogy. There we go. Ace Attorney, Phoenix Wright, or rather Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. You know, you got the first one that is just simply Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. You've got Justice for All, which is the second one. And then you have the third one, Trials and Tribulations. These are excellent, excellent games. A lot about logic and, you know, puzzle solving via logic and pointing out inconsistencies and stuff like that. And then there was a fourth game that tried to change it to a different protagonist, Apollo Justice, which I unfortunately don't have yet. However, there is another game in the franchise that took it more towards a point-and-click adventure game style, which is Miles Edgeworth, Ace Attorney Investigations. Now, Miles Edgeworth is not really a villain, but he's definitely an antagonist in the Phoenix Wright games because he's a high-profile prosecutor, whereas, you know, Phoenix Wright is a defense attorney. So you end up butting heads with him a lot. And this one, you know, you end up spending a lot more time investigating crime scenes to figure out what happened and everything, alongside like some detectives and so on, rather than, you know, solving court cases and stuff like that. All right. Now, of course, some of you may be wondering, well, where are the Pokemon games? Why don't you have any Pokemon games in your collection yet? And the unfortunate truth is I traded in a lot of games when I was a kid. I used to have a lot more Game Boy Color games, Game Boy Advance games, and so on. But the problem is when I traded in, I traded in my original Game Boy Color for a Game Boy Advance and traded that in for a Game Boy Advance SP before eventually getting them again. You know, I have them sitting back here, exact same colors I had as a kid. But when I traded in my Game Boy Advance SP for a DS, I knew I wasn't going to be able to play Game Boy Color games anymore, so I traded those in as well to kind of soften the blow because I was a kid and stuff. So I ended up giving up my copies of Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Yellow, as well as Pokemon Crystal. However, later on, I ended up trading in some Game Boy Advance games as well. I don't remember why, but it was after I got my DS that I kind of stopped trading systems in. So it wasn't because I wasn't going to be able to play them on the 3DS or anything. But I also used to have Pokemon Ruby as well. And but later on, I did eventually get Pokemon Diamond on the DS, as well as the remake of the Gold Silver generation, you know, Pokemon Soul Silver, and this is the complete package with the Pokewalker in it and everything, which probably has a dead battery by now, but I probably lost like a Caterpie or something trying to evolve it all the way up. But these are still fun games. This was about when I fell out of the Pokemon franchise for a good while, though, and didn't pick it up. Excuse me, I didn't pick it up till much later. And I have just a few more games here. I also have Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, which is a remake of the original very first Fire Emblem game. Not Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance. That was actually I think the 7th game in the franchise. That was the first one to make it to the West, though. But no, the original Fire Emblem games came out on the Famicom, and they had like 4 or 5 or 6 of them come out on the Famicom or something like that, and they never made it to the West. So this is the remake of the original very first Fire Emblem game. This is the one with Marth in it, I believe, like actual Marth. And then, of course, the last games I have for the DS are all Final Fantasy games. I have Final Fantasy III, which is the only version available in the West. It has since been ported to the PSP and to Steam, but this is a full-on 3D remake of Final Fantasy III from the Famicom, which never made it to the West until here. I remember this coming out. I was super excited for it. I've never actually beaten it myself, though. I have watched a Let's Play, so I know how it ends. You know, these early Final Fantasy games didn't really do too well on the story up until this one. This is Final Fantasy IV for the DS, which is completely different from Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo because it's, again, a full-on 3D remake. And this is, in my eyes, one of the second best ways to play this game. Although it has since been ported to mobile and Steam, and I would say Steam is the better version of this to play. But this is also the hardest version of the game. But it's completely remade in 3D with new graphics and voice acting and CG cutscenes and everything. And it really is wonderful. A great way to play this game. I still prefer the 2D version, but that's just me as a purist. And then the last Final Fantasy game I have is the sequel to Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which was originally released on the Game Boy Advance in Japan, but eventually made its way to the West on the DS as Final Fantasy Tactics A2 Grimoire of the Rift. And unfortunately, I have not ever played this, so I don't know whether it's a continuation of the story from Tactics Advance, or if it's at all related or not, or how it relates to Ivalice in general. But anyways, that is all of my DS games, which just leaves the 3DS. All right. Not as big of a collection here. We'll go ahead and just get these two out of the way because I haven't really played them much at all. We have a couple of the Harvest Moon 3DS games. We have Harvest Moon 3D, A New Beginning, and Harvest Moon 3D, A Tale of Two Cities. I think the Tale of Two Towns, Tale of Two Towns, I think that one came out first. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, 2011 versus 2012. So yeah, this was the one that came out first. And this actually also had a game on the I want to say the Wii or the Wii U. I'm not entirely sure. No, 2011. So not the Wii U. This would have had to have been on the Wii, I think. So or maybe this one also came out on the DS and it just wasn't in 3D. Yeah, I think that's what happened. This one came out on the DS as a 2D version. And again, I don't really know too much about these. I didn't really play them. I do know shortly after this was when the original Harvest Moon developers split from Natsume, the publisher, and lost the rights to the Harvest Moon name here in the West. They still have the rights to the Harvest Moon name in Japan, so both Natsume and the original developers put out Harvest Moon games in Japan, but the original developers, since they couldn't call it Harvest Moon here in the West, they call their games now Story of Seasons. So those are the like true successors to Harvest Moon, whereas the newer Harvest Moon games after that split are Natsume only. But either way, next up is another game I don't really know too much about. It's kind of a puzzle game, but I haven't really ever been able to figure it out. It is Dream Trigger 3D. I really don't know too much about this. It's some kind of puzzle game, but that's literally all I know. And this actually had a rip in the actual plastic on the cover of the case here, so I had to use some tape to bind it up. I don't know if you can see that well on camera. All right, and there was a few ports of PS2 games made their way onto the 3DS for some reason. The one I have here is Tales of the Abyss, and this is actually a really good version of the game. If you can't pick it up or play it on the PS2, it's pretty good to play it here as well. So I've never gotten too far into it, though. This one was a launch title for the 3DS, I believe. Steel Diver, and this was really little bit more than a tech demo. It used like all of the 3DS's features, the stereoscopic 3D, the gyroscope, the cameras, everything pretty much. And it's pretty much just a submarine simulator, and that's it. All right, we also have Theater Rhythm Final Fantasy and Theater Rhythm Final Fantasy Curtain Call, which is the sequel. And this is actually the special edition or day one edition or whatever that includes a music CD as well. And these are basically just Final Fantasy music rhythm games. That's it. That's all it is. And they're quite a bit of fun, actually. Really a lot of fun. But the art style is as you can see from the thing here, it's all like puppets and everything. Still quite a bit of fun. All right, we also have Super Mario 3D Land, which is the prequel to Super Mario 3D World on the Wii U. It's a lot of fun game. They really took advantage of the 3D mode for this game as well. You can see I'm trying to burn through this quickly now, can't you? So they didn't just port over PS2 games to the 3DS. They also ported N64 games Nintendo themselves actually did them. And one of the best ones, I think, was Ocarina of Time 3D. And this is actually the only version of this game I've actually properly beaten because of the Water Temple. It's a hell of a lot easier here because now you can actually switch the Iron Boots on and off on the fly and stuff like that. So it's not as annoying or as much of a pain. And it does look quite a bit better than the N64 version as well. Speaking of Zelda, though, I also have The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, which is kind of a spiritual successor to A Link to the Past. Uses pretty much the same Hyrule map, but it's completely made in 3D. Really good uses of the stereoscopic 3D in here as well. A lot of depth to the maps and everything, because this is top down, just like A Link to the Past was, and they really did well, I think, with the verticality and everything. I also have Fire Emblem Awakening. This is the only Fire Emblem game I have on the 3DS right now, and unfortunately I've never beaten this. Fire Emblem games have this habit of using permadeath, where if a character dies in a scenario, they're gone for the rest of the game. And if they're integral to the story, you'll see them like in story sequences, but they just won't ever fight again. And Fire Emblem Awakening was the first one to offer you the choice between that classic option and the ability to play in a more casual fashion where there was no permadeath. And I unfortunately chose the classic option because I wanted to be true to the franchise's roots. And unfortunately, that kind of stopped me from playing it as far as I probably could, because as soon as I lose a character in a scenario, I shut it off. Because I don't want to actually lose a character, so I shut it off. So I may have to give this another try, just start it over from the beginning again. I think I'm like halfway through though, but I may have to start this over from the beginning at some point with the more casual mode, so that I can just keep pushing through. All right, and Square Enix was putting out a lot of different RPGs that harken back to the classic Final Fantasy roots around this time, and one of those, and they were completely shocked that it did so well, but one of those was Bravely Default, and this actually had a subtitle in Japan that I forget what it was, something to do with fairy wings or something like that. I don't remember what it was actually called there, but yeah, Bravely Default. I do not unfortunately have the sequel Bravely Second End Layer, but at some point I will. However, what I do have the sequel of is Luigi's Mansion. We have Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Not as good in my opinion as the original Luigi's Mansion. I don't really like the artistic changes. I do understand that, you know, the lower resolution of the 3DS and the 3D effects and everything, they really wanted things to pop more, so it's a lot more simplified. But I much prefer the higher detail environments from Luigi's Mansion 1. And I'm not really a huge fan of like going around to the different mansions and everything rather than exploring one central location. So I am looking forward to Luigi's Mansion 3, even though it kind of reuses the same art style from here, just kind of like a more polished version of it. But Luigi's Mansion 3 looks like it's all in one location, so I'm definitely looking forward to that one. All right. And then I also have Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance, which, by the way, is 3Ds, which was a nice little gimmick to the title there. And again, really good use of the 3D here, but not the best way I would say to play this game. I would say play it on the PS4 if you really want to play this game. But still really good use of the 3D mode as well, especially for dropping into the worlds where you're actually like diving and stuff from great heights. Not the best story, but it does help set up the groundwork for Kingdom Hearts 3. Alright, the pile is getting smaller. This is Shinobi for the 3DS. I think this is a remake of one of the earlier Shinobi titles, but I don't know for sure. I've never spent much time with this, unfortunately. I didn't get too far into it, but it is a side-scrolling game. We have Rayman 3D, which is not the best version of Rayman 2. Actually, it's one of the worst I've heard, but it is the only version of Rayman 2 I have, and the only one I've actually played. So, still quite enjoyable. Now, I talked about Professor Layton and Phoenix Wright in the DS section of the video. So, of course, I have Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, where it's kind of a mishmash of the two, where you kind of flip back and forth. You play a segment with the Phoenix Wright characters where you're going through their style of gameplay, and then you play a segment with the Professor Layton characters where you're solving puzzles like they do. And the art styles really do mesh fairly well as well. And really is a wonderful game. Definitely check it out if you're into either of those games or either of those franchises, especially if you have never played the other. because this would be a good testing ground to see whether or not you want to continue on to their separate games as well. And then the final game I have for the 3DS is the only other Pokemon game I currently own. That is Pokemon Y, which I picked up over X because it's red. I like red. Red's my favorite color. Really, really enjoyable. This was probably the first Pokemon game I've actually beaten since Crystal. Because I remember I got really bored in Ruby and eventually put that down. Diamond, I ended up getting up to the Elite Four and then had to do some grinding and never got back to it. Soul Silver, even, I never even finished that for some reason. Probably because I spent so much time with Crystal as a kid that I knew the game too well. And it was just more just to see what they did with it to make it, put it on the DS. Anyways, that is it for my Nintendo handhelds. Next video will be probably PlayStation games, PS1, PS2. So until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Please remember to comment, rate, and subscribe.